feel me? What the hell are you? We are...
Venom is propaganda. Welcome to the series where we break popular movies and shows down to the atomic level and expose the subliminal and the not so subliminal feminist and woke messaging hidden between the lines that the vast majority of people don't notice. Before we get into it, there's a couple things I need you guys to understand. I call it propaganda, which implies that it is included on purpose and with the intention to assert a narrative. However, it's not always the case that the writers do this consciously. A lot of the time, when this type of subliminal messaging is injected into movies and shows, it's done simply as a consequence of the writer's own brainwashing. Their mind has been too thoroughly saturated by the feminist propaganda pervasive throughout all forms of American media and now bleeds into everything they create. Millions of Americans, in fact, have been infected by decades of various forms of propaganda, but especially feminist propaganda, without them even knowing it. This brainwashing has invaded the minds of American audiences so insidiously that unless you're privy to it, it's almost undetectable. In the last video, when we dissected Invincible, a lot of people told me I was stretching the moments I called out in the show to fit a narrative. They accused me of seeing things that weren't actually there. I'm a reasonable man, and while I will admit that some of the points I made could have been articulated better, nothing I said was stretched. You don't believe that someone would include brainwashing in their show. You don't believe it's possible, because your depth of awareness is extremely shallow. And you've most likely never created anything by yourself. You've never created your own video, your own movie, or any other form of entertainment. If you had, you would understand that every word, frame, and scene is added intentionally. Every detail is on purpose, and your level of consciousness while creating this bleeds into your work. If your depth of awareness is too shallow, you will not be able to transcend the initial stages of resistance and denial caused by the cognitive dissonance that arises within you when confronted with the assertions that I will discuss in the video. That's the reason you might think I'm stretching it. That's how deeply the roots of decades of subliminal programming have grown into your mind. The propaganda has integrated itself with the frame through which you interact with the world. This is the point at which I feel obligated to give everyone watching this a fair warning. To someone whose eyes have been opened to the programming, you will start to see it everywhere, even in pieces of media you've already encountered. It's like watching an entirely different movie. Now that that's out of the way, let's get into it. First point of contact is the black woman, but not just any old black woman. It's a Jamaican black woman whose accent is so thick, it's a wonder she got a top-tier scientist job, where one would assume fluent English is a requirement.
The organism's got out of containment and it's missing. We don't know which one.
Some of you might misunderstand the point I'm making here. I don't personally care what race the characters are. I'm trying to explain to you that despite whether or not you or I care, the authors do. When they're making the movie, they select these traits in their characters for the purpose of making a statement. The order in which characters appear implies their importance within the status hierarchy of the story. Some of you morons think that because it's not overtly stated, it means it doesn't exist. Why would they tell you? Here's the secret message, everyone. The type of character they are, and more specifically, the demographics embodied by the character are used to make a statement. I'm not going to pretend she was that hard to understand, but the fact that she has an extremely noticeable accent is a device planted by the authors. I'm going to say this again because this is the way in which you need to be thinking about all media you watch. The fact that the first point of contact out of all the random scientists in the room is a black woman with a thick accent is an unspoken statement made by the authors. I would overlook this if the story itself gave even the smallest reason why she is a higher status scientist than the rest of the scientists in the room. However, it doesn't. And in addition, she's not stationed in any particularly important looking seat, so why would the CEO need to speak to her first? The story has not established a clear reason why she is more important. Another not so subtle, unspoken theme featured throughout the movie that ties in with this one is that black voices are to be given top priority. Again, I'm not making a personal statement about her demographics. I'm explaining to you why this character in particular, with her very specific set of demographics, was implanted by the authors to make a statement. And if you don't believe me, just wait until a little later in the movie. There's a much more painfully obvious example coming up. People accuse me of reaching because they overlook these smaller details. But when it comes to subliminal messaging, less is more. Another thing I wanted to mention that I personally find very amusing is that despite all the virtue signaling done by feminists and castrated men who produce this type of subliminally soaked media, they still give the most important character spots to white people. More specifically, white women. You know why? It's because that's who leads the feminist movement. That's who really leads the woke movement. That's the demographic of people pushing this propaganda. Despite how virtuous they wish they were, they can't transcend their own egos. They still want to be the main character. When we watch movies, we subconsciously project ourselves onto certain characters. They might not be the main character, but whichever character resonates with us, we identify with. Here's the most important thing you need to understand about feminists in general, but especially white feminists. They think they're these independent, unemotional, stone-faced stoics, when really, they're just damaged goods. They're traumatized little girls who suppress their emotions and lack the courage and the strength to venture into the world again. They're actually extremely emotional, but that's what they hate about themselves. They are the opposite of rational. And that is why every smart, quirky, weird scientist girl in movies is played by a white woman, because they want to vicariously live as the person they wish they were, by projecting themselves onto the Mary Sue. If you'll notice, it's never an ugly or fat scientist, always a cute, quirky looking one, with big ol' nerdy glasses to really capture that I'm hot once I take off my glasses look. Moving into our next scene here, I feel almost as though fate dictated this moment, because the very first scene used by the authors to introduce our main character and his love interest perfectly displays the point I just made about feminist white women. She uses the pillow that her deadbeat boyfriend holds over his head to shield himself from his dreaded reality as a loser to smack him awake.
Nope.
Missed me.
He tries to get her back, but misses again to drive home how much of a loser he is. I think I would just prefer an alarm clock.
Morning sunshine.
Another side detail I wanted to mention is that the fact that they're even having this stupid pillow fight is also a device. Pillow fights are typically thought of as a more flirtatious activity than other types of roughhousing, especially between opposite genders. This scene, however, feels very tense and awkward, not flirtatious and lighthearted. Listen to her tone when she speaks to him.
Oh, wow, you wearing a suit? Yes. I love it when you wear the suit.
Thank you. I have depositions today in the Life Foundation case. Hey, let me know how your meeting goes.
My meeting?
There's no warmth there. If anything, there's resentment. She doesn't even sound like she wants to be there, much less flirt around with him. The reason this scene is written so robotically is because the people who write these scenes are actually chode neckbeards that write relationships from how they imagine a relationship would go. Or they're written by feminists, which I've already gone over. For them, it's not about writing an interesting story or interesting characters and seeing where the characters take the story. It's only about the aesthetic of all those things. It's about vicarious living through projection. Projection onto their imaginary, unrealistic characters. They've never had a relationship, or at least not a healthy one, and that's exactly why we end up with these clunky, boring, robotic romances that just don't feel real. Because they're not. Here's the real point though. Poorly written scenes like this one are used to fill the gaps while the writers wait for opportune moments to inject the narrative they actually want to tell. The advertised main plot, that is Venom, is actually a subplot to the real main plot, which is woke leftist propaganda. Then, of course, despite how busy and perfect she is as a strong, independent lawyer woman, she brings her loser boyfriend coffee in bed.
You were perfect.
She didn't just wake up. She woke up much earlier than him, so much earlier that she made coffee and is now all dolled up and ready to head to the office in her masculine attire while her idiot boyfriend oversleeps. No suits for the lady, please. That would be reinforcing natural gender attire, and we would hate to look like a woman now, wouldn't we? Why not wear some real pants to really drive home how she's also figuratively wearing the pants in the relationship? She's so responsible, in fact, that she remembers both of their schedules.
Hey, let me know how your meeting goes.
Maybe?
And just to clarify, I'm well aware that women frequently wear masculine dress clothes, okay? That's not a new thing to me. But within this particular context, it's important to the device that they're using. As I mentioned before, everything in this movie is an aesthetic, but I want to clarify what I mean so that we're on the same page. A quick Google search will tell you that an aesthetic is a set of principles underlying and guiding the work of a particular artist or artistic movement. I want you to direct your attention to the words set of principles. This could also be called the frame through which the authors want you to view each moment of the movie. That's why everything feels robotic and fake. It's all a facade they put on as a cheap substitute for a real story, which is not dissimilar to how North Korea puts up fake apartment buildings on their border with no people in them to feign prosperity. Every single moment in this movie, down to the frame, is a fake apartment building. Nothing more than a Hollywood prop. And to top it all off, throw in some homosexual propaganda with the rainbow flag saying, "Resist!" And as fate would have it, we won't have to wait long before observing another example of their Hollywood prop aesthetics. Let's take a look at the very next scene. It looks like a damn stock photo. You got your clean-cut brown person as the receptionist, another clean-cut brown female receptionist this time next to him. Then you got some random duos sprinkled in, and a cutesy office lady who's such an independent, free spirit, she does her work on the staircase. Now before you say it, I'm aware that's how the building is designed. It's obviously a sitting spot. I'm arguing that it's a bad spot. Do you know how fast your neck and back would get sore hunched over like that? Speaking from experience, it might look cute, but it's not ergonomic in the least. But again, this ties into what I was saying earlier. Nothing needs to work in the movie. All it needs to do is make an unspoken statement through the use of aesthetics. And this aesthetic is screaming, look at what a cute, modern, open-minded work environment we do journaling in. Feminists and castrated men are obsessed with the look of something. And since they're not actually superior to anyone in reality, they hide their inadequacy behind the guise of modernity, intelligence, and class. They subliminally project this insecurity into media using settings and other devices, such as this very nice looking office space, to make the audience subconsciously associate high-strung, castrated behavior with intelligence and superiority. Check out what happens next.
How's she do?
Berkeley, Brown, MIT. She's got a scholarship, bro.
What'd I tell you?
It's safe to assume they're talking about Richard's daughter. Richard's daughter never becomes a real character. This is the only time it's ever brought up, which means it's another unspoken statement used by the authors to project their virtue signaling into the audience. Look everyone, this brown person's daughter got a scholarship. Where to and in what way, we have no idea. All we know is that he listed off a few prestigious schools, and the audience's subconscious mind assumed the rest. That's all it takes for these subtle hints to be accepted and absorbed by your subconscious mind. Moving on, we've got yet another brown person looking down upon this lowly white man. Eddie's boss, in fact. And can we also just stop ignoring how utterly boring the dialogue is in this movie?
You know what I love about this view? It never gets old.
But there's a reason for that too. And the reason is simple. Nobody involved in Hollywood cares about writing good stories anymore. The entire movie industry has become one gigantic propaganda machine that exists solely for the purpose of injecting the public with nauseating amounts of subliminal messaging. I say that as if that's not what it was already for, but it has gotten excruciatingly worse since 2016. Now this next point I also mentioned in the Invincible video, and I'm going to keep mentioning it in the videos to come, because it's a very important detail to which you should pay attention. You have to keep track of how each demographic of characters is written. Straight white men, when shown in general, but especially when shown in the same scenes as people of color, Asians, or even straight white women, are always portrayed as dumb, goofy, or having overall lower moral standards in an unspoken comparison to their non-white, homosexual, or female colleagues. As we slide right into the next scene, again, I can't help but feel as though the universe conspired to bring us this moment, because this next scene displays the exact point I just made. Fortunately for you guys, I slogged through this sequence, soaking up every painful, poorly written moment so that you don't have to.
It never gets old.
It's date night. Ooh, this ought to be good. I'm just kidding. This was really bad. Watching this scene felt like a signed reading. She starts off by saying, "My mother always taught me," which is of course more subliminal messaging that women are the wise ones.
Well, my mother always told me that anything in life worth having would take sacrifice, patience, and be a lot of work. That's you.
That's not.
That I'm talking about.
Nah.
Yeah.
A small one perhaps, but a subliminal message nonetheless. Now I already know this is a part where a lot of people are going to tell me I'm stretching. Although very small compared to the other inclusions of propaganda in the movie, within the context of everything I've already told you, along with everything I will share with you, it is a detail that cannot be overlooked. Yes, you could make the case that she just so happened to say mother, and normally it wouldn't matter and I wouldn't care. I wouldn't even pay attention to this detail. However, as I said, within the context of everything else in this particular movie, no detail is too small to overlook. Another subtle tip-off you might not have noticed about movies and shows is that anytime a character thinks back on some wise words given to them, what pronouns do they use for the wise person? It's almost always female pronouns. This is an example of what subliminal programming does to you. Your brain does the work for them. All they need to do is set up a situation in which you assume the answer. The catch is that there is only one answer to assume. That's how they get you. Predictably, later on during the conversation, she chastises him for what a screw-up he is.
Many people that you don't deem worthy, but we don't want to repeat of the Daily Globe incident.
Ow, really?
This particular device is not even a new one. For decades, straight white men in movies and shows have been shown as incompetent and in need of being taken care of, or being reined in by their girlfriends. And it's no different here.
Are you gonna behave yourself tomorrow?
No.
So they make it out of the restaurant, and now, after all this nagging and naysaying, we're supposed to believe they can't keep their hands off each other? I don't know, Eddie, maybe I'm missing something here, but which part of her busting your balls all night turned you on the most? The funniest part is that they couldn't even pretend this scene was hot. They both look so tense and awkward, and her robotically taking her tie off and putting it on the man isn't fooling anyone. Remember earlier when we talked about the pillow fights being used as a device in a failed attempt to display their lightheartedness, even though it was a completely unbelievable scene within the context of the story? The same thing is occurring again with the application of this usually sexy technique. Do you know why it's considered sexy for a woman to do that? It's because within the context of normal sexual relations, the man is in the dominant position. The man is the one doing and the woman receives. Ties are also usually worn by men, not women. So for the woman to be the one taking the tie off and then tightening it around the man's neck, it implies a flip of the typical roles and can make for some very interesting bedroom experiences. The reason it does not work in the slightest within the context of this scene is because for the entire movie, all we've seen is what an impotent man-child Eddie is, and to add on to that, what a high-strung, frigid bitch his girlfriend is.
Thank you.
They were never in the traditional roles to begin with. She was already a ball buster, so why would it be an exciting little quirk for her to put her tie around his neck? Yeah, I think not. And no amount of cliche techniques is gonna convince me that these two characters have the hots for each other. I quite simply do not believe you. Eddie awakens in the dead of night and sneaks over to her computer. Based on the way she acts later in the movie, I would have to assume he's done this before, and yet she still gave him the password to her work computer with all her highly confidential emails. Yet another plot point that just doesn't work. Here we see him perusing through her emails, and as bad as this movie already was, I found myself curious as to how much worse it could get. Somehow, I had a sneaking suspicion that, despite how short this scene was, one of those emails was going to inflate the virtuousness of her character. And I was right. Take a look down here. Dear Mrs. Wang, thank you for your insightful presentation in our class last month. Professor Wallace. She's such a smart, independent lawyer lady that she gave a presentation to a college-level law school class. This frame is only viewed for 5 whole seconds, and yet even here, they felt the need to signal how wonderful she is. I would be willing to bet that less than 1% of all the people who watched this movie caught that email. Yet the writers felt it necessary to add in. But stay tuned, because the virtue signaling doesn't end there. Our next sequence brings us to a tour of the Life Foundation, where the CEO is giving a presentation to an elementary school field trip. Suddenly, at the end of his sentence, the little black girl has a question, and all the white kids shush her.
Only dreamt of.
Mr. Drake?
It's okay, don't silence her. Come here, what's your name?
Allie.
It's okay, Ellie, you know, sometimes it's what people do. They try and silence those of us who ask questions, but you know what, in the end, we're the ones who change the world. Take good care of that, Ellie. Guys, this is Dr. Skirth, say hi.
I better not hear a damn word about reaching. Again, look at the demographics involved here. She raised her hand to ask a question, and never ended up asking the question. The plot point wasn't the question she was asking, it was to subliminally inject the narrative of whites oppressing black voices. Now, of course, in the movie, he has to leave for his interview and assigns another scientist there to answer it, but we as the audience don't see that part of the movie because that's not the important part. That's not the message they wanted to get across. Again, this movie is not about Venom. I need you guys to fully grasp why this is not okay. If they were interested in developing the story, then a good plot point they could have added here would have been making this little elementary schooler ask him a question he wasn't expecting, and him maybe giving a mean or short answer to really develop how much of a villain he is. However, none of that matters. So Eddie begins the interview with the CEO, but then he goes off script and starts talking about the lawsuits that the Life Foundation was trying to keep under wraps. The interview is canceled and Eddie gets fired for going off script. Then his fiance leaves him because it's traced back that he used her laptop to bring up the lawsuit topic. She says that despite how difficult he was to put up with, she did it anyway because she loved him.
Your ego requires constant attention and you're stubborn as hell. But I was willing to roll with it, Eddie, because I loved you.
This is another cliche trope, and despite how bad it sucks anyway, it doesn't even work, because again, we've not seen a shred of evidence that she actually likes him. I can tell the authors want the audience to think that, but they failed. So again, this breakup doesn't really come as a shock. Now we take a peek into the lab of the Life Foundation, where testing the symbiote on rabbits is taking place. After a brief explanation of what is needed to maintain symbiosis with a host, the CEO brings up human trials. Miss Virtuous Scientist objects, and he makes a subtle threat at her children if she doesn't comply. Very often in movies where the bad guy is a man, a high-ranking woman working with him will take issue with what he's doing. She might end up switching sides or becoming a whistleblower. My question is, why is it that just this one time she finally had an issue? They've been working together for years, along with the fact that the writers make subtle hints throughout the movie that the CEO routinely performs unethical practices, including human trials on helpless subjects. This isn't new behavior, and I'm sure as the lead scientist, she's well aware of how shady he is. She's most likely headed a great number of experiments on human subjects. So why suddenly take such an issue with it? It's not just this movie that's done this before either. No woman is ever held responsible for the unethical actions she's committed under the command of the assigned evil man. Now I can already tell some of you are going to immediately hop on the "it wasn't her fault" bandwagon. Riddle me this then. Despite the fact that the Nazi scientists in real life were technically just following orders, why did we still hold them accountable? Why did we still put Nazi leaders on trial if everyone was just following Hitler's orders? Wouldn't they be completely blameless since they're not the tippity-top guy? See how that same logic doesn't hold water anymore? Women are never held accountable for their actions in the same way that men are. Everyone on the planet subconsciously takes mercy on women, and you just proved it. We come back to Brock's perspective. For some reason, this homeless woman is quirky and knows how to negotiate, but can't get a job.
Oh, yeah, we're empty.
Cost you $5.
$5 for a paper that's free?
I walked all the way over to the vending machine, got the papers out, and brought them back over here. So you can have them personally delivered to you.
You did that for me?
Yes, I did.
Oh,
$5.
that's pretty steep.
Tell you what, you give me $1 for a song, I'll throw in the paper.
I tell you what, I will give you $20, but not to sing, all right?
Deal.
You know, I just find it strange that someone as seemingly lucid as her can't get a job. Anytime something feels out of place or unrealistic, and it isn't justified in some way by the story, you can bet it's a device planted by the authors. Even the homeless women are giving Eddie a run for his money. On his way back to the apartment, he passes his neighbor making out with a girl, hinting at Eddie's loneliness about the loss of his fiancée. It implies they once had wild nights similar to this one, but again, no, they really didn't. It's just so funny to me how they continue to allude to how great their relationship was when we've already seen that that's just not the case. It's like when somebody keeps trying to lie to you despite the fact that you already know the truth. It's like, I already know you're lying. Why are you continuing this charade? Who is taking job recruitment calls this late at night? Oh, hell nah. Now they gotta ruin Eckhart Tolle too?
Realize deeply that the present moment is all you ever have.
In case you don't know, that's Eckhart Tolle's voice. He's the author of The Power of Now. I highly recommend the book, by the way. Unless you've already experienced divine presence, you wouldn't understand it if I explained what the book is about. The thing I hate most about liberals and their most unforgivable sin is that they think they understand divine presence, but they don't. And they end up soiling it in their attempts at mimicking it. That's all I'm gonna say for now, because like I said, unless you've already experienced it, it's difficult to explain. This next sequence is extremely important, so pay close attention. While Eddie is trying to meditate, his neighbor starts shredding on the electric guitar. He doesn't even attempt to knock on the guy's door and ask him to quiet down. Instead, he chooses to boil in his resentment and try to go to sleep. This is a typical nice guy syndrome response, and it's going to come up later as well, so we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. Returning to the lab, we've got ourselves another stock photo frame. Token. Remember at the beginning when I said that the order in which characters appear implies their status within the hierarchy of the story? Unless otherwise specified, we are to assume the character's importance in the imaginary world based on the same principles we'd use to assume a person's importance in the real world. For example, where they stand in a lineup of doctors. Notice how the other races, aka the white doctors, are standing behind the black doctors. Take note also of how the black woman stands in front of the black man. Even though they're both black, he's still a man, which means his status on the American leftist victim hierarchy is lowered. Being a man means you're an oppressor, but since he's a black man, his race gains him a few victim points, and so the leftist writers place him higher in the lineup, which then suggests to our subconscious brain that he is more important than the whites behind him. Same thing with the black woman. Now I can already tell that this is another one of those parts where you guys are gonna cry about me reaching or seeing things that aren't there. Let me ask you guys a question. How are movies made? I'm being serious. How are movies made? You know what I'm willing to bet? I'm willing to bet you can't even answer that question. You can't answer that question because you haven't thought that far into it. And yet, here you are, questioning the validity of the things I'm pointing out. The only reason you're even thinking about it right now is because I'm the one channeling your attention. But otherwise, you would never even have thought about the movie in this way. If you haven't even tried questioning and dissecting media in this way before, then of course you wouldn't notice anything there. Because quite frankly, your mind is untrained. Not all of you watching this are morons. Some, and I dare say even most of you, are on the same page. Or even if you're not, you're at least smart enough to give it a chance and learn to think about this in a more intelligent way. All of you guys are appreciated and noticed. But for the morons watching this, who want to accuse me of reaching, I'm going to spell it out for you. Movies aren't made out of thin air. They're made by people wanting to tell a story. Every detail in every scene is on purpose. Out of the many ways there are to tell a story, It's an almost universal trait that movies and shows weave subplots and other literary devices into their work to create an intricate fabric of a story. There are always nuanced angles from which to look at the story, but to be honest, I would argue that the angle of the movie I'm showing you now is actually the main plot of the movie, and that Venom, the advertised main plot, is actually the subplot used to lure in views for their main plot of subliminal social commentary and brainwashing. But returning to the original point I was trying to make, our minds are forever making judgments and distinctions. Until the day you die, your mind will be forming subconscious patterns about races, genders, countries, accents, and everything else you ever come into contact with. We're never not making subconscious judgments. And the more you try to suppress that part of yourself, the more you become like these virtue signaling pansies in the news who are just as guilty as anybody of the things they claim to have transcended. Don't be like them. Let's be real, please. Moving on, however, we have our first human trial subject, and his name is Isaac. Standard liberal propaganda is to bash religion. So they make this absolutely atheistic man into a religious fanatic just for this one moment, and for the sole purpose of making him seem even crazier somehow because the writers are that juvenile and amateurish, I guess. And of course, the test subject is a scared, dumb-looking guy given the biblical name of Isaac, but then the CEO bashes the story of Isaac's sacrifice and God, almost like the writers couldn't decide whether to make him a religious fanatic or feel like he's above God. Honestly, I'm probably giving them more credit than they even deserve. The CEO is such a non-character, pure writer's projection. This is yet another example of what I talked about earlier. The writers know nothing about cliches or what makes them work, but more importantly, they simply don't care. They have no respect for the art of stories, and so they just throw a bunch of cliches in a blender and call it a day. Now here's a part by which I was pleasantly surprised. Our straight white male is giving the quirky scientist woman a genuinely hard time. One that she doesn't respond to with a stupid one-liner like they usually have women do in these situations.
You have to know how to disappear. I was pretty good, but you, whoever you are, you suck.
Okay. My name is Doris Skirth. I need your help. I work at the Life Foundation.
You do?
Yes.
Wow, good for you. We're done.
They give the man the win. This is one of the only moments in the movie where the scene is just about the movie. Everything the characters do lines up with the type of person they are and the experiences they've gone through thus far. Everything makes sense. There's no injections here, there's no cliches, there is only the story and the genuine way in which these characters would act. I wish I could say the same for the remainder of the movie, but let's keep going. And of course, we couldn't let him stay winning. He had to go stalk his ex's apartment, even though it's been 6 months since they broke up. This part is huge too, and really highlights the author's incompetence. They use the excuse that their relationship was so good, and that's why Eddie just can't get over her. But alas, they were conflicted. They also wanted to inject the feminist trope of the girl being the emotionally mature one and totally over her boyfriend. Not only is she dating a new guy, but they're already living together, and he's the one who moved in with her. All of that within 6 months. You expect me to believe that their relationship was so great. These two people had hot intimacy and were about to marry each other. And within 6 months, she's already so moved on that she's got another guy living with her already. But Eddie's the one still hung up over it. Despite how bitchy and cold you guys showed us she was, Eddie is somehow still addicted to her. Yeah, right. Even without the propaganda, this plot point is total garbage. We're not even done with this scene yet.
It's pretty cool, all the people that he took down.
Yeah, I was one of them.
Really, nigga?
A lawyer?
No, he's a doctor. A surgeon, actually.
He's a surgeon, but he lives with you. Right. See, this is what I'm talking about. Why are all the men in her life being babysat by her, regardless of their job or disposition? This theme, if we're gonna call it that, is completely irrelevant to the Venom subplot. Oops, excuse me, I mean the main plot of the movie. Now, personally, and I'm sure a lot of you guys watching this would feel the same way, if my girlfriend's rambling hobo ex-fiance showed up at her house, regardless of whether or not I also lived there, but especially if I also lived there, I wouldn't be so carefree as to just walk in the door. Well, see you later, you kids have fun catching up. But the writers desperately want this scene to happen, so they're just gonna jam it in there anyway. Eddie passes yet another happy couple on his way around town during his self-reflection moment. Poor Eddie. Everybody seems to understand relationships except for him. I'd be remiss not to mention that the interaction with his ex-fiancée is unspokenly used to give Eddie the incentive he needs to get back on the horse and take on the Life Foundation. But it still sucks because the relationship sucked. To be fair, however, it does make sense that this character wouldn't be able to resist a story this juicy. So even without the broken trope that they tried to use, they got lucky in that they developed a character who would believably go back on his own and try again, even without the motivation of getting the girl back.
Cannot control.
Yeah, got it, but
We are literally a generation away from an uninhabitable Earth.
Another leftist piece of propaganda is pushing this belief that in 1 or 2 generations, the Earth is going to be this barren wasteland, and that white birth rates are the cause. I want to keep this video on track, so I'm not going to delve any further into that particular rabbit hole, but I just wanted to mention it since they did pop in that tiny bit about overpopulation and climate change. I'll probably talk about it another time, but just keep it in mind so that when you inevitably encounter any anti-white propaganda in your life, you'll recognize it. The more pressing question is, why of all people would he go to her first?
You're the only person that I trust.
Okay, no. That doesn't work. Especially not after the big scene of her telling him to fuck off. So he makes another big scene and the doctor decides to check him out. Maybe it was just the medical office where I worked, but our doctor's schedules were completely booked. Nobody would ever be able to squeeze in some wacko, especially not for a random MRI. Nothing about this makes sense, but we're just gonna move on because I'm assuming the audience is just supposed to suspend their disbelief for this scene. Why would the fiancée call him if she wants nothing to do with him? It doesn't even make sense that Dan would call him, other than that he just gave Eddie an MRI. But why would the fiancée want any part of that? The writers want to push this romance so fucking bad, and yet they've given us every reason why it not only won't work, but shouldn't work. Nonetheless, they continue to smash their heads and ours against the wall like a special needs kid. This is the part I've been waiting for. Remember earlier when I talked about the typical nice guy syndrome response? This is the second half of that point. One universal trait of nice guys is that they believe they're being mean by setting boundaries with people. That's why he didn't even attempt to ask the guy to turn down his music before, and instead wallowed in his victimhood. Nice guys also believe that even though they're cowards who are too scared to share their true feelings with people, if the time came where they had to bare their fangs, they'd be the toughest one out there. It's like those furries or anime cosplayers who say, "Don't make me unleash the beast." In reality, this of course isn't true, but in Venom, it gets to be true. These limp-dick pansies that write superhero shows get to act out their fantasies in ways they wish would happen, and other limp-dick nice guys view these shows, and it further perpetuates the lie they all allow themselves to believe instead of moving past this mental disability they share. To be fair, most men aren't aware this psychological phenomenon exists, or if they are aware, they don't believe they have it. Either way, that doesn't make them any less responsible for resolving it, but most of them never will. Eddie finally asks him to turn the music down.
Yeah.
Hey, can you turn your music down, please? Because I'm having a really hard time.
Whatever.
First of all, nobody would ever say that, but this is what nice guys imagine would happen if they stood up for themselves. They think the world is out to get them, so of course, that's how the nice guy writers wrote the scene. He finally gets to unleash the beast within and bare his nice guy fangs to the cool guy douchebag and make him cower in fear. Another book I highly recommend you guys read is called No More Mr. Nice Guy by Dr. Robert Glover. It explains in way more detail the psychology of what I'm talking about with the nice guys. Finally, some action. Allow me to remind everyone watching this that this is the movie we were advertised. This is. Not the stupid ass exposition, not the fiance, not the stalking her house. This. Cool, kick-ass Venom action. We just spent half of the movie on exposition, 99% of which is completely garbage anyway, And this definitely isn't the end of the bullshit either. The vast majority of this movie is subliminally saturated propagandist bullshit. Watching this movie is like opening a chip bag. 80% of it is completely empty. And I have to mention this little detail too, because it is relevant and it is subliminal. What I've noticed in a lot of movies is that the only significant roles given to white men are either being a villain or being a total loser with a perfect little feminist girlfriend who needs to take care of him like a baby. I'm not gonna spend too much time on it, but again, like I mentioned with the climate change and the white birth rate, it's something to keep in mind.
I don't want to see you again unless you have Brock.
Did you hear the stupid way he said that? Some actors just really suck at emoting anger, and this guy's apparently one of them. It sounds more like someone trying to sound angry as opposed to someone who's actually angry. They think that gritting their teeth makes them sound tough or something. I don't know, it's just stupid.
Who is Anne? Your pulse is quickened.
It was just established that Venom can read his mind because he's quite literally inside his head. And Venom even says he knows everything.
You remember him.
How do you even know about that?
I know everything, Eddie.
So you know everything except for the fiance because the writers want to jam this shitty side story into the movie through any means possible. Sometimes in movies, certain veins of story are explored that aren't necessarily relevant to the main story. Recently, I rewatched I, Robot, and I wanted to use this movie as a good example of the storytelling techniques I'm talking about. Without digressing too far, I developed a new appreciation for this movie because of the different paths established that were linked to the main story. These potential pathways are constructed through a brief joke or mentioning of something. All of these paths were crossroads from which they could have continued the story. In the case of I, Robot, one particular pathway of the story I'm referring to is the main character's ex-wife. She's only brought up about 2 or 3 times throughout the entire movie, and she's never shown. That vein was never explored further because it had no place in the movie, other than the occasional ex-wife joke.
Rejected human contact from machines.
So you're a shrink, huh? My ex-wife would sure be glad I'm talking to you. You don't know her, do you?
I'm sorry, are you being funny?
I guess not.
And the authors were okay with that. Comparing this with Venom, rather than bringing up his ex-fiancée every once in a while or briefly showing them break up, she's instead a constant thorn in the audience's side and completely irrelevant to the story. It would have been much better to develop that part of the story after Eddie Brock has had some sort of character shift where it's now relevant to bring up his romantic interest. This movie's problem is that the authors desperately want Eddie's romantic interest to operate as one of the pillars of the narrative, and it just doesn't work. Now, I said she was irrelevant to the story, but if you've seen the movie, then you might be saying, but if she wasn't part of the story, Eddie never would have met the surgeon boyfriend who gave him the MRI. What nobody watching this movie will realize is that that's the section they actually wanted to include in the story. Somewhere along their brainstorming process, somebody came up with the idea of running a Venom-infected Eddie through an MRI machine and having that cool-looking distorted scene where Venom freaks out in the machine. All they wanted was that one scene, and they needed a way for it to make sense in the story that Eddie somehow gained access to an MRI scan. Eddie's ex-fiancée getting together with a surgeon and then having Eddie crash their lunch together was all just an excuse for him to receive an MRI for that one brief scene. That's all that was. But because the people writing this movie are either super lazy or just shitty writers, they couldn't think of a better way to get Eddie into an MRI machine. The true origin, however, of this movie's terrible use of tropes, cliches, and characters is the culture surrounding modern movie making. It's not hard to make movies anymore, and the companies producing these works are owned by megacorporations interested only in churning out as much profit as possible from the exploitation of hot topics. Modern movies are made the same way fast food is made. 2 slices of tomato, a certain amount of onions, lettuce, slices of cheese, however many patties, not to mention all the patties must be mathematically identical in size and weight. The list goes on. Take that same method of objectification and labeling of burgers and apply it to movies. This movie needs to have this many minutes of romance, this many minutes of action, etc. Despite potentially starting as a company that values movie quality, if a company's ability to produce high-quality movies depends on its budget, and its budget is based solely on how well their last movie performed, certain fast food-like qualities need to be instilled within the process of production to ensure a dependable source of income. A system of copy and paste becomes not only necessary, but mandatory to maintain the production levels at which these movie-making companies wish to operate. It's definitely an in-depth topic, but I've already digressed a little too far, so let's return now to the movie.
I can't go with you. It's not safe.
Get in the car, Eddie. In the back.
I like her.
Why, Venom? Why do you like her? Is it because she's an intriguing, believable, respectable character with authentic traits and desires? Or is it because this is yet another device planted by the authors? There's nothing to like about this character, and she certainly didn't say anything cool or clever just then. It's already been established that Venom doesn't like being told what to do. You know what Venom really would have said? Aside from being more characteristic of Venom, it would have simply been funnier if he'd suggested eating her head, just like he did with everybody else.
You gonna eat anybody else?
Most likely.
I really need this job.
Let's eat his brains.
No! You do not touch him, he is my friend.
Instead, the authors revealed their puppet strings once again. As if this couldn't get any worse, Venom is now giving Eddie relationship advice.
You never apologized. You might not live to get another chance.
Why would this carnivorous space alien give a single fuck about this frigid feminist cunt or their relationship? Somehow she knows how to turn on an MRI. This isn't the only instance of her Mary Sudom either.
Told you I could fight ugly.
Oh yeah, feminism for the win, baby. It has to be the feminist Mary Sue. Now this could have been the case for one of two reasons. Either this is more projection, or this character was so painfully irrelevant that even the authors couldn't stand it, and this was their attempt at giving her a reason for being in the story.
Goodbye, Eddie.
With Venom seemingly gone, it's back to scratching the Mary Sue's back. Because what else is left to do in the movie?
I'm joining the public defender's office.
You're a good person, Annie.
What about you? What are you gonna do?
The network asked me to bring the show back. I want to start with a piece on Drake.
Oh wow, really? So what did you say?
I'm not into it. I want to concentrate on the written word. I scored the interview of a lifetime.
Oh yeah? Who?
You're gonna have to read it.
Oh, like everyone else.
Yeah.
This scene cracks me up because you can tell even they don't want to be there. They're like, Jesus Christ, let's just get these last excruciating lines out so we can all go home. There's a reason this movie is only an hour and a half, and it's because there was no actual story in this movie. Venom's parasitic true plot of subliminal propaganda can no longer be told because its host and subplot of an actual story has ended. After essentially running out of filler to use in between each injection of subliminal messaging, they're forced to end the movie. But that finally brings us to the end. I'm not a big fan of giving things ratings, but I'm willing to bet you guys can guess what mine would be after watching this. I am a bit surprised that this movie got as popular as it did. I think people just wanted it to be good so bad that they tuned out the bullshit. The more likely case would be that they're just not privy to it. Either way, that's what I'm here for. If you would like to leave a donation or contact me about anything else, all my links will be down in the description. If you enjoyed, make sure to smash that like button, make sure to subscribe and click the bell so that you never miss any new uploads, and I will see you all in the next video.
I got that adrenaline, not going with 'em, never gonna slow up in 'em, ready to snap, thinking it's time to go get 'em, they ain't gonna